We are going to conclude earlier than planned, but I will make this offer to you. I could share a little bit about my personal story in terms of working for the CIA and later joining the IRD. If you're interested, and maybe that's instructive to you as a young person sorting out your own career ideas. If you're interested, I don't want to impose that on you, and I will not be insulted if you would prefer not to hear it. Anyone want to hear it? Yeah. How many minutes can you endure? 5, 10? You say 5 minutes back there? Oh, 10 minutes. Well, just briefly, because I know I applied with the CIA when I was your age at age 20, yes, in 1985 as a student at Georgetown University. I had in high school decided I want to play some role in the Cold War, which meant, to my mind, either the State Department Foreign Service or the CIA. The CIA seemed more aggressive and adventurous, so I chose that, and I thought if I applied as a student to be in an administrative role, that would mean I was already on the inside by the time of graduation. So this is back in the mid-1980s. At that point, I'm sure this is no longer relevant today, you could walk into an office building in Arlington, Virginia, right off the street, unannounced, and apply for a job with the CIA. And immediately they would begin their investigation, and you would come back for a typing test. Do they still have those anymore? I was a very good and fast typist. That was my big selling point. And the investigation of me, for most people, it took 1 year. For me, because I'd always lived in the same place, it was only 6 months. So you tell them what people you want to talk to, which they know those are people who love you very much. And then they ask around for other people who may not love you very much to get the real story. And if you make it through that, there was a polygraph exam, then a physical exam, and then you're told to report to work without any, again, this is many decades ago, there's not a lot of, there was not for me a lot of communication about what kind of work you're going to do. I began my first job literally the first week of my senior year of college and reported to location at a somewhat unpleasant locale in Washington, D.C. that was at that point very dangerous, but they were doing fascinating work in terms of satellite surveillance. And I think they had in mind they could train me in that, and that could be my career. And the men who I met with had actually been involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, so that was all very fascinating. But again, the neighborhood was very unsavory and dangerous, and my school was on the other side of town. So I requested to be relocated to what was a much less interesting job up at the headquarters in Northern Virginia, where I stayed part-time until I finished school and then began a full-time job in the East Asia section. Again, I'm speaking historically, but back in those days, to be in the agency, there was either the scientific part or the administrative part or the overseas part or the analysis part. And I knew I wasn't going to be admin or science. I wasn't quite sure whether I should be overseas or analytical, but at that point, to be analytical was to be required an advanced degree and attracted more academic, introverted, more nerdier type of people. And then the overseas part entailed very extroverted, outgoing, people-oriented people who wanted to be overseas all the time and viewed being here in the U.S. as a virtual captivity. And I didn't see either of those directions as necessarily fitting my own desires, so I ended up going into the overseas part, but being a more analytical person in the overseas part. So that was kind of a compromise, starting out in covering East Asia, the South Pacific, Fiji, Western Samoa, Vanuatu, Tonga, strategically very important countries where there's a lot going on. But it was fascinating and wonderful, and entertaining people who came in from overseas as they were spending time in DC, and they assumed because I was young, I knew the fun places to go, which was not necessarily the case. And the off-color story I will share, if you can handle it, is the night before Thanksgiving, I was asked to take a visitor to, I thought it was going to be a bar, but it was a strip club. And I had to, well, I didn't have to, I went to my church service the night before Thanksgiving, taking my grandmother and serving as an usher, and immediately leaving church to go to the strip club, where I was paid, yes, not just overtime, but starting at midnight, paid holiday time because it was Thanksgiving. So that was quite a unique experience. I think I was there till 3 or 4 a.m. So if I was ever in any morally compromising situation, that was it. I left that section to join another section that was more involved with covering the United Nations, and also that entailed serving during the Persian Gulf War. And so that was very energizing and tense, and had a colleague whose son-in-law was serving in the Persian Gulf War, so it was very personal for her. And then also covering the UN, I believe our biggest controversy was the revocation of the Zionism equals racism resolution the UN had ratified in the 1970s, which after the Cold War ended and the US was paramount, was able to lead the revocation of that infamous resolution. So it was a great time of, after the Cold War ended, a great time of triumph and in many ways opportunity, but also a great time of boredom if you worked at the CIA, because the Cold War had ended. And so what happens next? So I moved to the Africa division, involved with Southeastern Africa, mostly Mozambique, which I had always been fascinated by, because Mozambique and Angola, when the Portuguese left in 1975, both became Marxist-Leninist and an integral part of the Soviet bloc, and had horrible civil wars between the Marxist government and anti-Marxist rebels. In the 1980s, the U.S. Began supporting the rebels in Angola again. Some conservatives wanted to support the rebels in Mozambique, but it was resolved that it was better to leverage and negotiate with the Marxist government to wean them off of the, at that point, declining Soviet empire, which turned out to be successful, and a negotiated peace was reached the Friday before the Monday I started that account. So that was great for Mozambique. It was bad for me. The war was over, and there was just the ceasefire to cover, and I had maybe 2 hours of work a day. So lots of chatting and sitting around and going out for long lunches and just filling the tedium. And so I realized probably this was not going to be my full-time vocation as I had planned, because I, with probably most people, just assumed the Cold War would be going on almost forever. Almost no one foresaw that it would be ending in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So I didn't know where to go from there. I looked on Capitol Hill, but also I had, throughout my 20s, been involved in church activism in my denomination, one of whose problems, from my perspective, was its funding or support for Marxist liberation movements during the Cold War. And so I had been fighting that through church political activity, and through that became involved with the Institute on Religion and Democracy, which was founded to take on that challenge in 1981. So they just asked me in 1994, you're already doing this work, why don't you just join us and work for us full time? And so that's an example of how you may conceive of a career, but you may shift unexpectedly into a very different direction, although the work was not necessarily entirely different from what I had anticipated had I stayed in the government. And then founding Providence as a Christian realism foreign policy journal 10 years ago also was able to benefit from my experience in the government, where I was only 8 years and left as a young man at age 29, but still learned a great deal about how government and bureaucracy work, and I think learned to appreciate the power and the need to be factual in terms of your reporting, to be succinct, to not be overly wordy, and ideally to be collaborative when you compile your reports. And also, I think it inoculated me against any kind of conspiracy outlook that somehow there are always very powerful people orchestrating and masterminding events. I never saw powerful people masterminding events. I just saw people trying to manage events day by day as best they could as they unfolded. So I'm glad I didn't stay, but I'm also glad I was there for as long as I was. It helped to shape the rest of my career in positive ways. And also, it was useful for publicity in that when I had adversaries with my work at IRD, they always accused me of being the former CIA agent, or he never left the CIA, he's still at it. So I always enjoyed that, although it became silly with the passage of time, but occasionally it still resurfaces. So I was able to exploit that. So hopefully that will be instructive and helpful for you as you plot your own career. Any questions or comments? Yes, back in the back.
I always love to ask this question when someone has shared a part of their life story or their career. To preface this question, do you understand the difference between soft and hard skills? Thank you. Just
Explain your interpretation.
some people I've asked have had a blank stare. From my interpretation, soft skills are communication, integrity. Hard skills would be, for example, typing or public speaking. Does that kind of clarify the
Yes,
definition?
yes.
Okay, perfect. So then, can you give us an example of one soft skill and one hard skill, which you wish your coworkers in the CIA better understood?
Oh, that's a very hard answer to respond to. Well, the soft skills to make it through the investigation for employment, any kind of drug history, criminal history, any record of treason or betraying the U.S. government obviously would preclude employments that filtered out a lot of people, drinking problems, extreme marital infidelity. Back in those days, any homosexuality was precluded, so you often got questions about that topic. And I had a friend who grew up on a farm, I guess, was asked about bestiality, which surprised him. Since I was a suburbanite, I was not asked about bestiality. But mostly my colleagues seemed like people of high character, although when you're moving around the world and in very challenging situations, it's not always necessarily helpful to marriage and family life. So you had those tensions, especially for those who wanted to go to Bangkok. Watch out for Bangkok. But let me see, the hard but I think mostly my colleagues had lots of soft skills and hard skills. People sorted themselves out in terms of what track they wanted to be on based on what hard skills they had, whether administrative, technological, or just very good people skills or analytical skills. But that's a good question. Anybody else? Yes, you have had lots of questions the last 2 days, haven't you? Which are all very good.
I apologize.
No, not at all.
I was just wondering if many people today accuse the CIA and FBI of being corrupt, and I was wondering if you had an opinion on that, and if it is, when did it become corrupt in your opinion, and how could that be fixed?
Well, I haven't been there in 30 years, so I can't speak to the current situation. But when I was there, the people who said it was corrupt or dangerous, it was people on the political left who made that allegation. And I remember there was a fairly large demonstration in the late 1980s at the headquarters, focused on Nicaragua and support for U.S. support for the Contras, which was an ongoing topic of controversy. And the demonstrators were outside the headquarters, waving signs and pictures of people being killed, purportedly by the Contras in Nicaragua. Jimmy Carter's daughter, Amy Carter, was there. I didn't see her, but supposedly she was there. So that was a typical CIA critique, that it was trying to overthrow governments around the world and generating war and strife, ostensibly in pursuit of American interest, but maybe actually in pursuit or in defense of corporate interest. So this idea of the right now having this critique of intelligence agencies is relatively new, and I find personally disturbing and largely detached from reality. So beyond that, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but again, often based on a more conspiracy mindset, that there's more there than there's actually there. Anybody else? Yes.
I had to be careful with my comments in the presence of the former CIA agent, Mr. Tooley. No, I just wanted to thank you, the IRD in Providence, for hosting us. This has been an excellent conference. I know the topic has been national security, but since you're being in and around Washington, D.C., where do you see the biggest need for Christians in public life?
In terms of the federal government or anywhere?
Either one, whatever your federal government would be interesting, but in general, actually in general, organizations or federal government.
Well, obviously, always needed that, as some of our speakers have cited, the government, in principle, is ordained by God to establish justice and defend the innocent from the aggressive and the criminal. And so Christians can, I think, with good conscience, serve almost anywhere in government, and are always needed. But again, in sync with our theme of Christian realism, if you approach it with an extreme, I call it pietistic moralism, that can certainly discourage you or distract you or give you unrealistic expectations, in which you will find public service as being distasteful, whereas I'm not sure it's any more distasteful than any other arena of human life, including the church. So you have to approach it with human nature is what it is, but you're there to be a force for good, hopefully, and to be a redemptive influence. And the situations are always going to be not ideal, but how can you make the best of those non-ideal situations, which is can be disconcerting when you're young, but hopefully as you age, you accept that reality and you just deal with it. I guess another lesson I would offer up would be, since I went into the government, or I applied at age 20, I hadn't thoroughly investigated what I wanted to do at the CIA. I just had a almost mythic idea of what I would be doing there. I like the novels of John le Carré. Is anyone here an espionage novel fan? Okay. Anyone under the age of 40 here read John le Carré? You have. Well, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy has been a book and a TV series, so I encourage you to read those. I despise James Bond, which just seemed to be absurd fantasy about villains with gold teeth living in castles underwater. I just thought, I want to fight communists. I don't want to fight villains living underwater with gold teeth. So the John le Carré novels, he was formerly in British intelligence. They were known for their gritty earthiness and reality. And I identified with George Smiley, the ongoing hero in the novels, who was not flashily heroic. He was just gray and kind of mundane, but very thorough. And just worked out of London with occasional trips to Paris and West Berlin, which to my idea seemed ideal. I would just have a beautiful office here in Washington, D.C., and occasionally jet over. It was a lot more complicated than that.
What about Tom Clancy?
Well, yes, that came along a little bit later, and I tried to read his first novel, which was not Patriot Games, but the submarine movie. Hunt for Red October, yes. So a great movie, but I couldn't get into reading the novel. But I was a little bit older then at that point. Anybody else? So yes, if you're going to go into a particular field, you need to fully investigate what that will entail, not just have a mythological concept of what you hope it will entail. Anybody else? Comments, questions, overview? How did we fail you in this conference? Well, you've been a great audience with great questions and comments, so it's been our pleasure spending time with you. I hope you will recommend this to your friends for next year, and that you will become, if you're not already, regular readers of Providence. And for those of you who are older, especially the professors, if you would consider, if you're not already writing for Providence, we would love to receive your submissions. And again, if you're in the DC area, Providence hosts a monthly lunch, typically with a foreign policy expert. Our next November lunch will feature a German who works for the Henry Stimson Institute. So he will be very interesting. So if you'd like to be on that invite list, let us know, or specifically approach James Diddams. Yes. Anything else before we conclude about an hour early? Yes, the Instagram contest, the moment you have been waiting for patiently. Did we have any submissions, Sarah Stewart?
Did Bethany's going to announce the winner?
Bethany, and thank you, Sarah Stewart, for all of your logistical labors behind this conference. We've had very few mishaps, so applause for Sarah Stewart. And I think we have a record number of schools represented. How many Sarah Stewart schools represented?
Have the count, but we do have a record number for attendees. We've had at least 100 people in the room.
So we actually had a waiting list this year. So Bethany, what news have you?
Well, I got 2 people, so that's about it. So the rest of you just lose out, I guess. Can't tell me you guys don't have social media. Anyway, I'm just gonna read off the tags because I don't know some of these people. Anyway, so the first place winner is gonna be Matthew Schick.
Will Matthew stand up so we can see Matthew? Hey,
Okay,
thank you.
cool.
Come
And
forward to get your certificate.
here you go.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then the second person is S Nazar 37 because I don't actually know the person's.
Well, that's a fitting finale to this year's Christianity and National Security Conference. Thank you again. Bye-bye.